Welcome, learners, to this session of At Home with APS. I'm Mrs. Kraft, and I'm here today for our English Language Arts lesson for grades 3, 4, and 5. Now, if you've been following us the last few weeks, you know that we've been working on our reading and writing skills, but particularly reading some stories through the lens of a writer. Why does a writer choose certain words? Why do they develop the plot in the way that they do? Why do they choose the same characters or different ones? And why do they name them the way they do? So when we look at things through the lens of a writer, we can understand how that develops. So this is our final week of our summer session. And if you haven't tuned in before, our sessions for weeks 1, 2, and 3 are available on our YouTube channel at APS. To this week, we're going to make a little bit of a shift from what we've been talking about in weeks 1, 2, and 3 to nonfiction. And do you remember what nonfiction means? Say it into your TV if you remember. Nonfiction. Nonfiction means not make-believe, which is kind of a funny way to say it's real. So when we read nonfiction works or texts, that means they are real. And sometimes they're a little bit harder to understand than the make-believe world. They're a little bit harder to write about because we can't just make things up, right? We can't just create characters. We're using characters that are real. So it's not make-believe. And so this week, we're going to look at ways to write nonfiction. And I'm going to be joined very shortly by my partner, Miss Abby, who's working on you with a lot of writing projects through these weeks. This week, she's going to particularly focus on the nonfiction, and we're going to look at it in 4 different ways. So each day, we're going to look at reading and writing nonfiction through a lens. And today's lens is our senses. We all have that ability to taste and touch and smell and hear things in the world around us. So when you go out for a walk and you are smelling the flowers and you're hearing the birds sing, and you're looking at the fresh green grass, and then you're smelling how it's been mowed. Remember that smell? Or if you go out after a rain and you smell the wet pavement and you see that, that's our senses that we're using to observe the world around us. So you're using your senses all the time to observe our nonfiction world. So let's take a look and remember our senses that we use. Remember, we have 5 senses. We have sight. You can see things. We have hearing. Things so you can hear the birds. You can hear your teacher talk. You can hear me right now through your TV. So our hearing. We have that sense of taste, right? If you chase a chocolate chip cookie, that's sweet, right? Sometimes we can taste some popcorn that might be salty or pretzel. So our tastes they really help us understand the world sometimes. Our smell and our taste work very much together, don't they? And those also, we can hear things, we can smell things, and then we can also touch things. So those are the 5 senses that we're going to be looking at today. And we have a really interesting story to read that you're going to get a sense of your senses just by reading this book. And of course, you can't be here with me. It's a little bit harder to talk about senses when you're there and I'm here. But that makes our job more exciting, because we have to present it to you in a way that you're going to be able to experience your senses. And I think this book is going to help you do that. So it's Monday, and Mondays and Wednesdays, we work on vocabulary. And so we're going to look at a couple words today that are sensory words. They're going to help you use your senses or that relate to using our 5 senses. Our first one, take a look at this. Look at that picture. Our iguana here is a really interesting critter. And I want you to think about touching this iguana. What would it feel like? Would it feel bumpy? Do you think it would feel smooth? How about would it feel warm or cold? What's your take on that? Have you seen one? Have you ever held a lizard? They're pretty speedy, so I haven't, but you may have. But our iguana is a little bit different. When you see a lizard run, it's got pretty smooth skin, doesn't it? Our iguana, he's bumpy. You think of a word, when you just see this picture, you think of a word that pops into your mind just looking at him. Well, he looks a little fierce, but we're going to look at sensory words today. And our word that relates to our iguana is texture. So the texture is how the iguana feels. Texture. Say that with me. Texture. Let's spell that word. T-E-X. T-U-R-E. So texture. Texture. Say that again. Texture. And that's when we touch things. So let's do our motion. Texture. 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 If you wiggle your fingers, that will remind you. That's going to be our sense of touch. But we can also see that texture, can't we? Let's look back. You can definitely see the texture on his skin. And I would love to touch that, very gently, of course, just to see what it feels like. But our texture says our iguana has skin that feels like pebbles, so it's rough. Our texture, the word, is a noun. It's a thing. Texture. So I have a really long definition. So now, if you don't have your writing journals pulled out, this would be a really good time to do that. We're going to be using those for the rest of our session. So if you have those out, awesome. If you have your Freyer model already drawn, great. Just to refresh, our Freyer model is just a way to record our vocabulary words. So we're going to put the word in the middle, and you can just do a quick drawing on your paper. If you want to do it later, that's fine. You can just write down the word, and I'll give you the definition also. So we're going to do a definition, a sentence, a synonym. Texture doesn't really have an antonym, and an illustration. And we love the illustration of our iguana. That's a fun one, but there's other things that you can draw that have texture. Do you have, let's take a look at our stuffed animal over here. Think about the texture. As I touch it, it's soft. You can think about petting a dog. In fact, this part and the feet have a different texture. So I can feel that with my hands, my sense of touch. So that's going to give us a texture. Maybe the texture is soft or smooth, bumpy or rough. Synonyms. How it feels. When I touch it. The surface. The quality. That's the texture. Let's look at a definition, and I have a long definition. We can definitely change this if we need to. So my definition, we'll see if it fits up here, is the feel, appearance, the way it looks definitely are. Let's go back to our picture of our iguana, because we have an appearance of pebbly skin, don't we? The feel, appearance, or consistency of a surface. So a surface is anything that you can touch. My book has the texture of a smooth surface. That iguana is going to have the texture of a bumpy surface. So the feel, appearance, or consistency of a surface or a substance. So water has texture, doesn't it? Very smooth. What about Jell-O? Have you ever eaten Jell-O? It's like solid but smooth. What have you eaten that's bumpy? Maybe some ice cream with sprinkles on it or chocolate chips. It's going to make it bumpy, isn't it? So those are things that are substances that have texture. So that's a long definition. You can definitely come up with one of your own also. And we looked at these synonyms. Texture is the feel of something. That's pretty simple, isn't it? Texture is how you touch something. The quality of something is the texture. So those are synonyms. Like I said, texture doesn't really have an antonym. It doesn't have an opposite. There are some words that don't, for sure. So if you could write a sentence using texture, and then if you could write draw an illustration. Again, you could use anything, right? Anything that has texture, anything that you can touch. You could write a sentence about our iguana friend, or about anything you have that is something you like to touch. Maybe you have a favorite blanket that you just love the feel of, or a favorite shirt, maybe a pair of socks that are really soft. That's texture. Okay, so we have another word that I want to introduce to you that relates to our sensory words. And this next word, the picture, is a woman, a beautiful lady smelling some flowers. She's smelling the flowers. Have you ever done that? Just put your head in a bouquet of flowers and taken a big sniff. It's wonderful, isn't it? You get all kinds of smells. Some of them are sweet, and some of them, sometimes you smell the green, kind of like the green grass or the green leaves. So, can you think of a word that has to do with smell? So it's got that sense, our sense of smell. If we smell something wonderful, we are getting an aroma. Aroma. Say that with me. Aroma. Aroma. That's an easy one to spell, isn't it? Aroma. Let's put that in our middle. The aroma is the scent of something. So it's a thing, and it is a noun. Aroma is a noun. So we have two nouns today. So let's take a look at how we can look at aroma. The flowers were beautiful and had a great aroma. Synonyms, how something smells. The scent, the odor, and the fragrance. Do you have a favorite perfume? Or maybe your mom or an auntie wears this perfume that you love? That's the aroma. Here in New Mexico, in the fall, sometimes we can walk outside and smell the aroma of roasting chilies. There's nothing like that, is there? Yum. That smells so good to us. So an aroma, as a definition, is something that has an agreeable odor or smell. How about, have you ever gone to the movie theater and smelled the popcorn as you walk in? That's the aroma. It's something that's agreeable to us. That means that we like it. It smells good. It's not stinky. And so the antonym, the antonym is a little bit different if something doesn't have a smell. Have you ever went in to smell a flower? and you realize it doesn't have a smell. So that's a lack of smell. It does not have an aroma. But our synonyms, smell, scent, odor, fragrance, those are the things that we like to smell. Those are the things that captivate our senses. So if you could write a sentence for aroma, we have our synonyms, and then draw a picture. What's something you like to smell? Do you like the smell of when it rains? You go outside. Do you like the smell of freshly mown grass? Have you ever been on the playground and they're mowing the fields? You can smell it, can't you? That's the aroma. All right, so we've talked about a couple of words that relate to our senses. And as I told you, I want to share a story with you that is really about using your senses to read this story. This is an older story, an older book. And it's very cool, again, because the person that wrote this story, called Toad, she lives in England, which is in Europe. And she is a watercolor artist. So she wrote the story, and she painted the pictures in watercolor. And you can see, if you use watercolor, you can kind of see how it gets a look to it, right? A little bit, not real smooth and defined images, but they're kind of watery. And so we're going to talk about Toad, who lives right in a swampy area, and it's very watery. So I think watercolors are the perfect way to illustrate this story. So our book is called Toad, and it's by Ruth Brown. Are you ready for an interesting story? Look at how she painted his feet. Kind of like, does that affect your senses right when you see it? So Ruth Brown is our author, and it is written by Dutton Children's Books from New York. It's also illustrated by Ruth Brown. So here's the first page, and you can see the watercolors, how beautiful it is. This is the tale of a toad. A muddy toad, a mucky toad, a clammy, sticky, gooey toad. What does that invoke in your mind when you hear those words? Clammy, sticky, gooey. Now, clammy and sticky make me think when I'm really hot, and sweaty. But gooey could mean ew, or I think of caramels or something that you're eating that's sticky. Maybe glue, if you're using glue in school. Gooey. So those words sort of capture our senses, don't they? Here we have a beautiful picture. Can you see the eyeball up there in the corner? Here we have some more words. Listen very carefully. Odorous, oozing, foul and filthy, and dripping with venomous fluid. Wow, I'm not sure this is an animal that I want to see. And there's one word in here that really makes me scared. Did you get that word? Can you see it up there? Venomous. Did you say that? Venomous means what? It means that they have a poison, right? So that's a little bit scary. But so is the oozing, odorous, foul, and filthy. I think that's going to assault my sense of smell, maybe. What do you think? Toads covered in warts and lumps and bumps, with stains and spots and speckled humps. Take a look at our toad and see how she's describing him or her. you can really get a clear picture. Definitely her paintings help a lot, don't they? But when she talks about Toad is covered in warts and lumps and bumps, that goes back to our picture of the iguana, right? That's the texture of the toad. You can't be here to feel one, but you can definitely sense that as you're sitting at home listening to these words with stains and spots and speckled humps. Look at our toad and you can see it. He's just dripping. So this is where the story gets interesting. We start to build the plot here. Can you see the eyeballs hidden very carefully in the swamp? They're watching the toad. Did you pick those out? What do you think it is? Kind of an animal. Something that lives in the swamp, right? So we're going back to Toad now. He's nasty, septic, toxic, and bitter. And he leaves a slimy trail. Lots of adjectives in this, isn't there? Nasty, septic, toxic. Oof, that's a tough word. That means he's no good, right? And bitter. Have you tasted something that's bitter before? Something that doesn't taste very good? You eat it and go, oof, that's not sweet or salty. It's bitter. Toad is also a bug-crunching toad, a greedy, fly-munching, worm-slurping toad. He looks like he likes those worms, doesn't he? He's just slurping them right down. He is clumsy and careless, sluggish and slow. Let's take a look at those words. Clumsy means he just can't quite get himself to the right place. He knocks things over if you're clumsy. He's careless, which means not only is he clumsy, he knocks things over, but he doesn't really care, right? He's living in a swamp. He's also sluggish. What does sluggish mean? Have you ever seen a slug? Looks kind of like a worm. Let's get back to what he's eating. He's probably going to eat some slugs. They look a little bit like worms. But slugs move really, really slowly. They crawl along, so they're slow. So she put words that mean the same thing kind of together. Clumsy and careless. Sluggish and slow. She didn't use just one word, she used two. And that helps us get the meaning a little bit more. It just hits it home. I see an eyeball. Do you see it? Whew, something's hunting the toad. And he can't even see very well. So winking and blinking, he waddles and stumbles, trudges and trundles. And so she's using this device again of using two words that are similar in meaning, but really help us get that sense. It helps you use your senses, do you think? Let's read those again. He can't see very well. So it's almost like he can't see during the day. He's winking and he's blinking. So maybe it sounds like the sun is kind of bright on his eyes. He waddles, kind of like a penguin, and stumbles. He trudges. Have you ever trudged? You're walking through some mud or some dirt. You're trudging along. And trundles. And something's looking at him. Do you see it? It's hanging out in the back. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. What's hanging out of our toad's mouth? I'm sorry, not our toad's mouth, of the monster's mouth. I think it's our little toad's hand. What's going to happen? Oh no! Straight into the jaws of a monster. So he couldn't see where he's going. He's stumbling along, and oh my goodness, he ended up in the jaws of the monster. Our poor toad. But do you remember? Back a few pages, he's nasty, septic, toxic, and bitter, which means our monster is not having a good lunch today. He's not happy, and he is like, yeah! Pah! He spits out that toad. He yells the monster. It spits out the toad. Can you see the toad's face? He's looking pretty pleased with himself because he knows that, nobody wants to eat me. I don't taste very good. Look at this picture. You can see with your senses the toad's feeling happy. But I want to go back to that picture of the monster. Look at his face. And look at everything coming out of his mouth with the toad. He's like, blah. It's great. Does that help your senses? Can you almost hear it and see it? Almost feel it? Eesh. The happy toad, the safe toad, the carefree and self-confident toad. Look at our little guy. You know what? I didn't think he was cute before, but boy, he sure looks cute right now, doesn't he? His little hands. I just want to tickle his little belly. Beautiful picture. Beautiful watercolors that our artist did. The toad with the monstrous smile. He's pretty proud of himself. What did you think about the toad at the end? I definitely liked him better at the end. He grew on me, right? He found ways to keep himself safe by using what he could. He can't change the way he looks. He can't change anything about himself. And he's just happy with that. He goes along, he's clumsy, he's eating worms, he's doing everything he wants to do. He's living large. He's taking a little shower now. I want to get back to these words. The happy toad, the safe toad, self-confident. Those are really important qualities. And he's carefree. Can you picture him? Our author does such a good job. I'll get back to the beginning and show you the cover of the book again. Look at all these pictures. They're just beautiful, and they're all watercolors. So our author, Ruth Brown, she does a great job with her watercolors. And you can see the writing, there's not a lot of words in this story. So it's an excellent place to start. If you'd like to write about something in nature, go take a walk. Find a bug or an interesting creature that you see, or a flower that you could write about, describing it with your senses. And then drawing some pictures that match that. So up next, Miss Abby's going to come and do some nonfiction writing with you, and I will see you tomorrow.
Hi, writers. Happy Monday. Today starts our last week of learning together. We saved maybe the best for last. This week, we are going to do what I think is so much fun. We're going to delve into informational writing. Now, I think informational writing is pretty important because it's the type of writing that most adults end up doing. When I have to write an email, I have to include a lot of information. When I'm reading news articles, it's usually filled with lots of information. information is really important to you as a student, but also when you're done with school, you're still going to need information. So I think this is a real handy text type to learn about. Our essential question for the week asks, what makes an explanation effective? When you explain something to someone else, how do you know if you were effective at it? How do you know if they understand what you were trying to explain? Maybe you're trying to explain where to find something. So maybe you say, oh, it's over there. And the person says, over where? That's proof that you're not being very effective in your explanation. What if you're trying to explain to someone how to do something and they can't do it? That might mean that your explanation is not very effective. So this week, we're going to dive into how do we explain things effectively? What makes an explanation effective? When you explain, you are trying to inform. It's kind of a fancy way of saying it. But we think that informational texts should include sensory details. So when you're reading something, when you're writing something, when you are explaining out loud, we want to make sure that we're using sensory details. Sensory details are just using your senses. You have 5 main senses. Your sense of smell, your sense of touch, your sense of sight, hearing, and taste. We have 5 senses, and those senses help us explain information to others. So one way that you can make an explanation more effective is by using senses or sensory details to inform others. In the word informational text, I see the word inform. I see the word information. So informational text is writing that gives information. It's writing that informs others. So as we're writing this week, we're going to learn some tips, some tricks for making our explanations more effective. Do you have your writer's notebook out? Well, go grab it if you don't. What I did was in my writer's notebook, I'm adding in a whole new text type. Today, I put a divider on there. We are going to go into informational writing. I am going to squiggle underline the word inform. I see the word information in there as well. Now earlier, Ms. Kraft read an informational text. Some people might argue saying, oh no, Toad by Miss Ruth Brown, that's a story. It is a story. It's also filled with information. Most of the time, information has to come with a story as well. That's what makes people understand it. So what I did, oh, did you notice the sunflowers? Okay, good. I didn't know. I wrote down a few facts about sunflowers. These are really easy to recognize. Perhaps you have seen some sunflowers in your neighborhood. I'm noticing they're growing quite tall around my home. I see them peeking over fences. They are so tall. So maybe you already knew that these were called sunflowers. But what I did was I researched a few informational facts that I thought, oh, I love these. So I put them down in a list. Now, a list is helpful, but if we can turn that list kind of into a story, that's how people will remember it. That's a very effective explanation. And today, we're going to really focus in on our senses. We're going to think about ways to explain sunflowers using sight, sound if possible, touch, taste, and smell. So in order to do informational writing, you have to start by researching, by asking questions and answering those questions. You have to start by having your facts ready before you go into writing. So if you have a topic, maybe something around you in nature that you're very interested about, think of questions that you have, look them up, answer them, research them, create a list. There are some road runners that I see often, birds, very fast birds, right around my house. I'm very curious about them. If you have seen road runners, do some research first. Step 1, write down the facts that you have learned. So, a few things that I have researched about sunflowers. They are the tallest flower. The tallest recorded sunflower was over 30 feet high. Friends, I'm about 5.5 feet high. That means it was over 5 Miss Abbeys on top of each other. Can you imagine me on top of me, on top of me, on top of me, on top of me? That wouldn't even be 30 feet, but almost. The tallest recorded sunflower was over 30 feet high. Wow. Next, they track the sun. It's a fancy word called Helio Tropism. Let's imagine this is the sun. The sun starts every day in the east. And as the day turns, the sun looks like it sets in the west. And the sunflower follows it. The face of the sunflower follows the sun. Look at how my pretend sun is moving. And the face of the sunflower tracks it or follows it. Wow. If you have sunflowers in your home, or if you see them in your neighborhood, pay attention. They are moving throughout the day based on where the sun is. That is a really interesting piece of information. Another piece of information is that they are native to North America. The very beginnings of sunflowers started in North America. So did I. I think that's pretty interesting. They have been used for centuries for healing. There are oils that you can pull, extract from the sunflower that people have used for healing all different sorts of body problems. Did you know that this sunflower has thousands of tiny flowers in it? Yeah. Right here, this outer layer of petals, also known as rays, covers tiny flowers inside. So what may look brown to you are the petals of thousands of flowers inside. So this isn't one flower. It's more like 1,001 flowers. That's a lot. These are also nutritional. When sunflowers finish growing, the seeds can be extracted, can be taken out, and you can eat them right away. Some people bake them, cover them with flavor, but you can eat them right away. You can also get oil from them, and with that oil, you can eat it or put it on your skin. So these flowers are much more than just beautiful. They're really helpful as well. So now that I have all of my information, I want to explain it to others in a really effective way. So I'm going to use the text toad to help me. This book is about a toad. We already know that. I want to use this text to help me write an informational piece about sunflowers. Now, the very first sentence says this is a tale of a toad. What I did was I copied it exactly. This is the tale of a toad. This next sentence, the second sentence of this book, a muddy toad, a mucky toad, a clammy, sticky, gooey toad, odorous, oozing, foul and filthy, and dripping with venomous fluid. Wow. That's a lot in just one sentence. Let's pay attention to a few things that we notice. I'm looking for patterns in the writing. One thing I notice is the word toad is being repeated. How many times do you see the word toad written in these two sentences? I think I see it 4 times. I'm going to circle it. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the author, Ruth Brown, repeated the word toad 4 times. Sometimes repeating the topic is a good way to let your readers know what you're talking about. Is this a toad? No, what is this? It's a flower. It's a sunflower. So we can keep going with our explanations. I think when I rewrite this, I'm going to put the word flower instead of toad. This is the tale of a flower. Oh, I like how that sounds already. But you know what? A tale is a story. I'm more going to give information. So I'm going to cross out the word tale and say this is the description of a flower. What I'm doing, writers, it's called copy change. I'm copying what the author, how she wrote it, but I'm changing the information. This is the description of a flower. Is this a muddy flower? No, that doesn't quite describe. That's an adjective, but I wouldn't use muddy to describe this. Every time I see the word toad, I'm going to replace it with the word flower. Now, I also see another word repeating. I'll give you just a moment. What word do you see over and over and over? I see the word a. A toad, a muddy, a mucky, a clammy. So the word a is being repeated as well. It's talking about different ways to describe. Do you see all of these words ending in y? Wow. Filthy. Usually words that end in y like this are adjectives. They're describing. And you know what kind of adjectives these are? Sensory. These are sensory details. These are things that you can see, touch, hear, smell, taste. So I want to think of words that I have to use my senses. When you see this, what is the first thing you think of? I'm going to draw an eyeball. Did you see yellow? I saw yellow. Tall. I see, now that I know, filled with thousands of smaller flowers. Next, let's talk about the aroma. That's one of our words of the day. I put kind of the side profile of a nose. Now, the sunflowers don't have a very strong aroma. I can't really smell them from far away. But if I put my nose right in the center, it has a very light aroma. Now, light can mean about the weight, but I mean the aroma is not very strong. It smells very clean. These are my opinions. It has a clean, light aroma. Now, when we go for touch, this is a stick figure hand. Oh boy, that looks like a palm tree. The texture, these are both our words of the day. The texture of this flower, the stem is quite rough. It almost feels like it might cut me, but it's not cutting me, but it is not soft at all. It's almost like the texture of sandpaper. Oh, I'll put the word touch. Texture of sandpaper. And then the texture of the petals, they're very smooth. It's interesting. The stem is very rough. I'll write that word, rough. But the petals are smooth and almost rubbery. The petals are smooth and rubbery. Ooh, that has a Y on it. I'll definitely have to use that word. Now, sound. I don't hear anything. So we can't use all of our senses when we're describing, because I wouldn't say that the sunflower has a sound to it. It's silent. Yeah, it's silent. So the sound, this is my ear symbol. Silent, unsounding, soundless, no sound. Soundless. I don't know if I just made that word up. No sound. So I have 5 senses: sight, smell, touch, sound. What am I missing? Taste. Well, it's not quite ready to taste yet, but sunflower seeds, I think, are delicious. So I will put a mouth icon, kind of for taste, that's a tongue, and I'll say delicious. Alrighty, friends. Now I need to write my explanation. I'm going to use my mentor text, Toad by Ruth Brown. I'm going to substitute or exchange some of her words for words to describe my sunflower. So I already had some ideas. This is the description of a flower. If you are writing about a bird that you see, maybe you could say this is the description of a bird. If you want to write about your brother, this is the description of a brother, a boy. Don't call him a toad, that's not nice. So let me get writing. This is the description of a flower. A blank flower, a yellow flower. A yellow flower, comma, a tall flower, a blank, blank, blank flower, a follows the sun like a puppy flower. I'm going to keep inserting more adjectives to describe and finish off with this is a description of an American sunflower. Friends, please get writing. Use our mentor, Toad, to write about another topic that you are very interested about. If you also want to write about sunflowers, that's great. Please share them with us. We want to see what you're writing at home. For reading tonight, try and find historical fiction that has parts of history and then a lot of story, because that's what makes facts interesting. We had fun learning with you today. thank you so much at home at APS.